Well, I want to welcome everyone to our first Faith and Ale roundtable discussion after our inaugural speaker of the 2020-2021 season. We had a fantastic speaker, Kevin Wells, last week, and we were just thrilled to have him what was obviously a abnormal situation for all of us, doing it virtually, not having that camaraderie of sitting right next to each other. But I think it was a great event. It was a wonderful talk. He certainly brought up a lot of hot button issues, a lot of things that are relevant today. And I think that's what our audience, what our members want to hear. They want to hear things that are relevant to the things that are happening in the church, in the news right now. And I think Kevin was great in getting us started in that vein. And I just want to open it up. We've got Jim Dwyer, our president, with us. We've got Mike Lancelot, our vice president. We've got Tim with us as well, one of our other board members. And I'm just really excited to have this discussion and get us started. So I'm going to, Mike, I want to turn it over to you because I know you had some really good, insightful feedback from some of our audience. And I think that's a great way to get us started.
Sure, no problem, Don. We had been running our men's gospel forum at St. John the 23rd Parish via Zoom on Monday morning. And so this past Monday morning, several days after Kevin Wells spoke, there was quite a bit of positive feedback about his message and how the many stories he shared in his personal life and how they were impacted by the priests that helped him during difficult times in his life, really struck a chord with our men. In addition, there was an email that we received at Faith and Ale from Dr. Giardetti, and his emails I'll read says, "Hello again, Mike and staff at Faith and Ale Fort Myers. I studied Kevin's book over the past 2 months. Of course, the book was The Priest We Need to Save the Church." He went on to say, "Wow, what a knockout for Jesus, our Savior." I thought that was a pretty big endorsement. And of course, Dr. Giardetti was really looking forward to hearing from Kevin. I also had said to Kevin during our question and answer session, I said, "Kevin, is it okay if we get additional questions after the event if I send them your way?" And he said, "Absolutely." So here's a question I sent on to him the day after his message to all of us. I said, "Good morning, Kevin. Here's a question for you." Quote, "Your message did not zero in on the title of your talk or book. Who are the priests we need to save our church?" And he answered in this way. He said, "That is a very fair question. At the end of the day, the priests we need to save the church are those like Bishop Strickland, who I started with, men willing to die for his flock and suffer persecution and calumny during these dark days in the church. He is strong where other voices have gone silent." He went on to say, "Rather than stating it outright in the talk, it was my hope to point to the faithful priest through storytelling." And he sure did a good job of storytelling from a personal vantage point.
He did.
But he went on to say, "In this case, through my uncle, Monsignor Wells, who stood truth to proclaim the indelicate and thornier truths of the faith on in vitro fertilization. These were the truths the other priests abandoned. Because of Monsignor Wells' powerful witness to his flock as a priest of God for 29 years, and of Father Stack's obedience to Mary's call, they were able to act as intercessors." And he goes on to say, "The priests we need are intercessors for their flock and helping us achieve heaven by their fatherhood, steady sacrifice, and prophetic voices. The priest we need to save the church was like the Anglican priest I spoke of, who, when recalling he could no longer be comfortable, but instead be like this Vianney you wrote about, who spent 18 hours of each day in prayer, hearing confessions, sacrificing for his flock, teaching, and the like.
Yep.
And he concluded, Don, by saying the 8 characteristics of what I believe make for a saintly priest are spelled out in my book. I should have been clearer about that to the men, or at least mention them. And they are: the saintly priest, 1, adores the Eucharistic face of Jesus. 2, is devoted to Mary. 3, prays devoutly. 4, assumes a victimhood. 5, is a father. 6, is persistently available. 7, preaches divine truth. And 8, dives into a soul at a moment's notice. Those were 8 really classic examples of the we need in priests, the priests we need, of course, to save the church, all available in his book.
And the sad thing is that well, number one, we were blessed as a group at Faith the Nail. For those that don't know Father Dennis Cooney, that are listening to this, many of our members know Father Dennis Cooney. We lost earlier this year to a long battle with heart disease, I believe, and he was one of those rare priests that embodied many of those 8 qualities. He had a very strong Marian devotion, very strong devotion to the Eucharistic face of Jesus. We know he preached vigorously from the pulpit. Anyone who went to mass, went to one of his masses, or heard him give a closing prayer or an opening prayer knows that he preached vigorously the divine truth. And he prayed, we know, devoutly, and cared for souls very, very deeply. In the mold of St. John Vianney, in the middle of coronavirus, at the very beginning of coronavirus, while he was dying, I remember the picture of him seated in a folding chair outside hearing confessions. To me, that is a incredibly emblematic of the types of priests we need. Priests that aren't in hiding, priests that make themselves available for confession, priests that are unabashedly Catholic in what they preach, speak about the uncomfortable issues. I used to go to daily mass with Father Cooney years ago, and I remember there wasn't a homily that went by where he didn't correct the Protestants or take a shot at politicians that favored abortion, or he shied away from no touchy subject matters. He preached the divine truth. He approached the truth as many of the priestly saints preached throughout history. And sadly, that's what we're missing today. And I think that's why Kevin wrote that book. It's evident that there's a gaping hole in the priesthood. And, we can take this conversation down a lot of routes as to the why. But I think maybe the first discussion I'd like to have with you all is, what does that mean to you all as husbands, fathers, laymen, businessmen, where you're essentially going into this world quite often without the spiritual nourishment that we need to be successful, setting up for success. Mike, you know this probably better than anybody, what it means to set up employees for success. And, many of us as Catholic laymen may feel as though we're not being set up for success. We don't receive the truth from the pulpit. Confession is not readily available quite often. In some parishes, it's 1 hour a week at a time, usually inconvenient for a working man. And then you going on. I mean, it's rare you hear the rosary preached or the rosary encouraged. And it's rare you hear subject matters discussed like in vitro fertilization, like abortion, like homosexuality. Um, and we see it all over the globe with churches that are being burned down, and very few people are speaking up about these atrocities that are happening.
Yeah, I
So
think,
I'd like to open that discussion up. We can start with you, Jim, on this. Do you feel set up for success? Have you felt set up for success in your life as a father, as a husband, as a businessman?
yeah, it's a really interesting question, the way that you pose that, Don. And I think I think it's a really important question. Um, one of the takeaways that I got from listening to Kevin the other night is, as I was reflecting on it and reflecting about what we look for in the priests that we interact with, I started to realize how much, well, first of all, as a father, how much responsibility. I mean, we realize this every day, but his story of the of interacting with those priests, both that didn't give him what he needed and those that did, but that interaction happened because he was looking to the priesthood for answers.
Yeah.
And so many people in today's society simply don't. As a father, it's my responsibility to help my children to understand that they need to look to the priesthood and to the Catholic faith for that encouragement, for that instruction, for that that focus in their lives. And I further reflected that I sure got that particularly from my mother. Oh boy, my mother, and you talk about a Marian devotion. She was certainly devoted, and she was devoted to priests and to seminarians and to taking care of them. So I kind of was led to, through my life, to be looking to the right places for that. Now, how prepared, as all of you come upon different priests that give you different things. I think we all have to seek it out. It would be great if all the priests were like Father Cooney, because I have a great deal of respect for Father Cooney and for his approach, but they're not. And part of my involvement with Faith and Ale, frankly, is because if we're not, we can't simply throw our hands up if the priests aren't giving us what we need. We have to go out and find it. We have to commit ourselves to growing our faith and this walking that faith journey. And so, there are priests and there are moments where I have felt that I've been very prepared by my interaction with them, but that's not always the case. And so, I certainly think we're living in interesting times. I think that the discussion about all the way to the top of the Catholic faith, the church right now, and I'm not here to talk about the Pope and what he speaks of, but I know he's often misrepresented, misunderstood intentionally, because there are a lot of forces that are trying to tear apart the Catholic Church and to tear us down as people. So there are just a lot of issues right now, and those priests that are on the ground, that are in our communities, that are our local leaders, need to be strong and need to help guide the flock.
Yeah. Tim Wells, what are your thoughts on that? You're a young dad like I am, or youngish. And
younger than me.
And at least we have young kids, right? I guess we could put it that way.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that question?
I was absorbing a lot of what Jim was just talking about, and trying to kind of better understand, what my role as a father is. And my son will be 2.5 next month. I've got another son soon to be born next month as well. And so, my role as a father is to obviously prepare him for the world. And the world is so many things that it wasn't when I was a boy. Uh, and I'm sure that changes every generation. So how do I prepare him for the world? What are the different things that are going to distract him from what is what is true and what is right? Look into the workplace. All the guys talk about sports and who's playing this weekend. What stocks are you investing in, and all those different things. But very little do you hear. Hey, what'd you think about the homily on Sunday? A lot of that is missing, and so it's really difficult sometimes to bring that up in conversation, especially when somebody is not even just a fallen away Catholic, but just completely not like-minded. To be able to have those open conversations and dialogue peacefully. So it can certainly be a challenge. But I think, going back at least from, of being a father is helping them to, see all sides to better understand our faith. And I think that tends to be a missing component when you go to have a conversation with somebody who is not a Catholic, who doesn't understand our rich, history and tradition and everything that makes us, who we are. So I think that you have to understand where other people will be coming from to, in a way, defend our faith and defend, the Catholic Church. And, and that's why, as far as nightly prayers, one of those prayers that I think is really important is St. Michael and praying to St. Michael. And I know that's something that's, at least as a parishioner of St. John the 23rd, we have a new statue for St. Michael the Archangel that's going to be erected here really soon, and I'm really happy to see that. And they include that in the prayer at Mass. So I'm really glad that as we, in a way, kind of go to spiritual battle to, protect each other and protect ourselves, that we need to be able to, have that type of ammunition, if you will.
Yeah, agreed, Tim. And I think, you spoke about the workplace and vocation. And I think one of the other things Kevin would probably say is that fathers need to start raising their sons with the goal of becoming a priest, not just becoming a successful businessman or a doctor or a lawyer or an athlete or whatever it is that is the most successful career at that time, but raising them with the goal, the highest calling of being a priest. We've lost that. We've lost that notion amongst fathers. And in terms of living out the year, and why so much gets lost, I think so much of our faith, our rich faith, gets lost is, quite often men are living out the year according to the fiscal year or the sports seasons, and they're not living out their faith according to the liturgical year. Living and celebrating all of the great saints we've had, all of the different seasons of the church, praying novenas along the way and devotionals, and celebrating, the traditions of the church, like Ember Days and Rogation Days, and a lot of these things that have been lost over time, that I believe need to be rediscovered by the fathers in families, and it not just be part of getting our families to heaven. I think is even beyond, even prayer being the most important, but supplementing that is living the liturgical year. And I think that is another missing aspect of why maybe we don't have the types of priests that we truly need, because we're not raising our sons according to those principles. Mike, you have been a successful leader in your career. You've heard many different speakers. We're obviously at a very interesting time right now for a variety of reasons, as Jim alluded to. What were some of your thoughts on his talk pertaining to the priests we need, and what your thoughts are in terms of how you've been set up for success as a Catholic business leader?
Don, I felt that his opening story about how when he first met his wife and she shared her plans on how many children she wanted to have.
Mm-hmm.
I think the number was 10, if I'm not mistaken. I want to have 10 children.
10.
And when I think of business, that's a very common exercise to set goals. And in business, our goals aren't always realized. Our projections aren't always met. Maybe that's why they call it a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing I feel applies in life. You know, as Kevin was able to share, the number of 10, they couldn't have even achieved one naturally because that wasn't God's plan.
Yeah.
And they both struggled and their marriage struggled. And if it wasn't for the priest that they had received help from, that was a great example, you know, that got them through a difficult time in their marriage. What a great priest they had that not only saved the church, but saved their marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just think that, you know, there's a lot of parallels between, you know, business and in life and in raising a family. You know, for example, one of the things I've said many times is, you know, being a father is the most difficult job I've ever had. But at the same time, there's been nothing more rewarding. And leadership in business is like that. You know, it's a very difficult job. But yet, when you see the help that you're able to provide and the guidance you're able to provide for people, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing them succeed because of your faith in them and your faith in God, especially your faith in God and getting through the difficult times and in navigating the difficult and challenging and turbulent waters, as Kevin pointed out.
Mm.
You know, our son is now 40 years old. Joni and I have a 40-year-old son. So Kevin's talk really struck a chord with me because we were very blessed to have him, but after Michael, we weren't able to have any more children. And it was a great example of how our faith, you know, had us finally accept that that may have been our plan to have 4 children, but it wasn't God's plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so now with a 40-year-old, I hearken upon my parents' words that I heard often, but it never meant anything to me when I was younger, and it didn't mean anything to me when I was a young father either, but it means a lot to me now. What they always used to hear them say is, your children are never raised. And here we are with a 40-year-old, and hey, you know, he has challenges in life. And so his challenges are his challenges, but as parent, you know, we concern ourselves with his welfare and well-being. And very recently, you know, there was a challenge that he faced and that we faced with him. And a great example of a priest that we have that saves our church every day is Father Bob Tabbert at St. John the 23rd. You know, I was able to have a heart-to-heart with him to get his advice in confession. And he followed up confession by saying, let's meet next week in my office. Mm-hmm. And then let me have you speak to another priest who I think can help you even more. And it's just a great, great example of a priest we need to save the church, but a priest that came to the fore, you know, to help us in a challenging time. Because it is true, your children are never raised. We're always going to face challenges. It's called life.
Yeah. That's
I also
great.
have to tease and say all this because one person ate an apple.
Yeah. Yeah. Adam, you know, he was probably that he's that first hype, that first priest, and he failed us. Your comments make me think of Saint Joseph. Saint Joseph only had one child, and he bore many sufferings in his life, on account of caring for Jesus, knowing with Mary that while he was their son, he didn't belong to them like, let's say, our children belong to us. Even though even our children are adopted in a way, we're all borrowing them from God, for a period of time. But Saint Joseph, I think, is a great model for all of us, not just as fathers, but as priests. What our priests need, the courage he had, the tremendous witness that he lived with. I mean, think about taking your wife, who you have to have faith in, has been made pregnant by the Holy Ghost, and is carrying the Son of God, and the fear of being found out, having your wife stoned to death, going to a foreign country by foot, and finding, a place for them to be born. Think about the humility that took. And then obviously the humility that he had as a carpenter. We don't hear much about what his life was like as a carpenter, but we know that he always took pride in his work, was always very serious about it, and he would have died for Christ. And in fact, Father Calloway has this great book, Consecration to Saint Joseph, and he talks about how Joseph died at a time before Christ fulfilled his mission, probably to protect him as a father, because as a father, he probably would have risked his life to go save Jesus. He would have been there at the foot of the cross. He would have been probably trying to fight, those who were trying to kill him, and he was spared and taken from this earth, because that wasn't for him. That wasn't his role. That wasn't his role as a father and high priest of his family. So I think Saint Joseph is just a wonderful model for 2020 and beyond, in terms of the priests we need, the fathers we need, that type of courage, that type of fortitude, that type of determination, that type of faith, and that type of devotion to Mary, because we know he was incredibly devoted to Mary. And I think that Saint Joseph is often forgotten about, in terms of the type of power he has in heaven, and also what the type of role he should have, not just in our homes, but in each parish. He's a really important saint, I believe, for all men in the church. What are your thoughts on Marian devotion, in terms of what it means to your families, what it means to the men that are in our audience, and what it means for priests? Why do you think that a lot of seminarians are mocked, as Kevin alluded to, for praying the rosary, mocked for a Marian devotion? Why is it that Mary is under such attack within the priesthood?
My feeling is there's a lot of misunderstanding of Mary and how we worship saints, in particular from non-Catholics. Where I've heard it said many times, we only worship God. You worship Mary and all the saints, and you have statues of them everywhere in your home. And there's the misunderstanding, with the distinction being, we ask Mary to intercede with her son, Jesus Christ, on our behalf. we're actually praying to her son Jesus through Mary in heaven as the intercessor. And so I think that's where some of the attacks come from of priests. And the more people can understand that, I know in my personal case, when I explain that, it's an aha moment for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I was surprised by is Kevin saying that some of the priests in the seminary essentially get it internally.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know what would drive that, because they certainly understand, that we're looking for intercession, that we're, ultimately, everything that Mike just said, the seminarians certainly should understand that. So I really don't understand why within the seminaries that's become an issue. And actually, when he said that, to me, that was the most frightening part, that in the seminaries themselves, these men who are walking towards the priesthood are already,
Being undermined.
yeah, it's really frightening.
Yeah, and I think going back to one of the reasons I brought up Saint Joseph was he also represented a type of masculinity, not toxic masculinity like you hear in the news today, but true masculinity, taking responsibility for all of your actions, caring for your family, having the courage to speak up when necessary. He is just the model man, other than his son, is the model man for us all to to model our lives after, and I believe for all priests to model their lives after. And I think that sometimes can be found, and I think Kevin would probably, based on my interview with him before his talk, and from what I know, based on his talk to all of us, is that Kevin would say that there is a severe lack of masculinity within the priesthood today. To me, it's rare I actually meet a priest that demonstrates the masculinity of a Saint Joseph. Part of that is the courage aspect. Courage is often quite lacking in our priests today. There are very few priests and very few bishops that would be arrested for the faith, that would say anything that might put their comfort in jeopardy. We know it because we know they readily accept and dine with and say nothing to discourage politicians who promote abortion and homosexuality. And they don't want to upset the apple cart of the money that comes in from federal government to support much of what they do. And so they turn a blind eye to a lot of really evil stuff. If we truly believe abortion to be what it is, which is the Holocaust of babies in the womb, why aren't there more bishops behind bars? Why aren't there more bishops that are sacrificing their livelihoods, their comforts for the truth? And I think that's because there is a profound lack of masculinity within the priesthood. And I think from what Kevin alluded to and from other stories that I've heard and read, that it's fostered in the seminaries, and that quite often the seminaries do not foster masculinity and try to drive out priests that exhibit too much masculinity. So, I would love to, I know that's a pretty hot subject, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that in terms of whether you believe, as laymen, we have enough priests that demonstrate true Joseph-like masculinity in the church.
Well, to kind of add to that sentiment, if you look back in history at some of the artistic interpretations of Jesus, of other male saints, some of them depict Jesus in a rather feminine way. And I don't know if that was just because of the time or because of the artistic interpretation. I'm certainly no art scholar, but
Sure.
but there should be more pictures of Jesus being a carpenter, which is typically viewed as a very masculine way of work, and so more imagery of Jesus being a man, because that was God the Son, and here in human likeness, and I don't think his human likeness was the feminine way that he was depicted for so many decades, or for centuries even. So even an updated imagery of who Jesus was, speaks volumes. I think it helps humanize him for us, in order to better understand him.
A great point, Tim.
And Don, the way you spoke about Saint Joseph, and I agree with that. I think when we talk about the priests we need priests who are willing to stand up. And I have had conversations with some priests where I thought, I think that we live in our secular world is moving away from the church. And because of that, I think there are many priests who are trying to soften the message and trying not to be controversial because they don't want to lose more people. Regardless of what they personally believe, they're trying to do what they think is right to maintain the flock. And frankly, I just don't think that works. I don't think that works. And we need them rather to step up and to be that, manly priest, which is willing to say, no, this is what our church believes, and this is what we stand behind.
Yeah.
Catholicism is not easy. It's never been easy. And it's only getting more difficult now than it has been, for the last, I don't know how many years. It's certainly getting harder. But that's the time when all of us, and mostly our priests, need to stand up for what's right and for the teachings of the church.
And it shouldn't be easy because it's reflective of obviously our path to heaven. And
Yeah.
Christ himself said the gate, narrow is the gate.
Yeah.
Many will be left out. There'll be wailing and gnashing of teeth.
Mm-hmm.
These are Christ's own words. So when I agree with you, and when there are concerns by priests, and I've heard these concerns, that, well, if I say this, well, then donations will dry up.
Yeah.
Or that big donor that sits in the pews will never come back, or he'll report me to the bishop, so on and so forth. Are you truly being courageous when you're afraid of money drying up? You're afraid of losing people? Where's your faith if you're worried that someone is going to be turned off by the truth? That's a problem. And I think Kevin, in his book, recognizes that as one of the big issues. Is, that's where that falls under that category of preaching the divine truth. Mike, I know Mike and Jim and Tim, I know we're running low on time. I would love to hear some closing thoughts from you. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. It was such a riveting discussion, particularly Kevin's personal stories, what he went through, and then obviously what he believes to be some of the more cancerous things that are happening in the church right now. But I would love to hear some closing thoughts from you on his talk, and then briefly on what you hope we can achieve this year through this virtual format of Faith and Ale.
Well, I will start with very briefly. I'll tell you what my last thought on this. I left with the message that we need to challenge the priests, and that is such a difficult thing for us as lay people to do. And you talk about courage, that takes some courage and some humility to say, okay, I'm going to move forward and do this. So number one, pray for our priests. And number two, try to stand up for what's right. And in those moments, be willing to challenge the priests. And I'm hoping for this season with the virtual format that we can reach more people since you don't have to physically be there. And I'm just looking forward to a great rest of our season.
Great. Tim?
I'm gonna echo Jim's words as far as needing to continue to pray for our priests now more than ever. And I think it's important that we as members and attendees of Faith and Ale, we need to continue to invite them to come and I know that their schedules are beyond busy, but we need to continue to invite them every month. And it should be a little bit easier now that they don't necessarily have to be at a particular place at a particular time.
It's a great point, Tim.
So I think we should encourage all of our priests, our deacons to be able to come and join us. They need to feel as enriched as I know that I feel and that we feel after every Faith and Ale meeting. So I think we should make sure that we're extending the invitation as often as we possibly can.
Great. Mike, closing thoughts from you.
Back to the point of having priests, stand up. I definitely feel those are not only the priests that will save the church, but I also feel they are the priests that have saved the church throughout the 2,000 years. And they also happen to be our most favorite priests. They're the ones that not only stand up, but they stand out.
Yeah.
And I thought, Kevin did a fantastic job in not only sharing personal stories, but leaving us with an additional resource of his book to learn even more. And so kudos to Kevin. I am really looking forward to a great season with Faith and Ale. Looking forward, in fact, our next speaker on November 12th, the title of his talk is Teach Your Children Well. And that was a part of this podcast about our children. Yeah. And unfortunately, he lost his son, a captain in the armed forces, was killed in action. But then in December 10th, we're hearing from Father Tad on beginning of life issues, and he'll specifically be addressing in vitro fertilization and assisted reproductive technologies. And that came up in this podcast.
Yeah.
Then in January, Tim Staples, Why Be Catholic? Black and white in a world of gray. So again,
we've talked about that here.
Our church, what a great title.
Yeah.
So we have a great, great season coming up with just those that I mentioned as an example. Hopefully we could begin to meet in person in a hybrid format. A hybrid meaning people who want to meet in person can, and we'll have social distancing in place with or without pizza, depending. And those that aren't comfortable in gathering in person can still join us via Zoom. We'll make that available for the balance of the season.
That's great, Mike. Yeah. And thanks for, the great job you do in getting many of the speakers that we do get for each season. They just build on each other year after year. Last year around Veterans Day, we hosted the head of the Father Vincent Capodanno Guild, and he gave just a riveting talk about the life and witness of Father Vincent Capodanno, soon to be Saint Vincent Capodanno, and talk about a priest that we need today. It's that type of courage, that type of humility, that type of heroism. And I think Bill Eggers will probably demonstrate a lot of those same themes in his talk about his son. So we look forward to that next month. I want to thank you all for joining us and encourage our audience to continue to stay tuned for more Faith and Ale podcast events that we'll be posting to our YouTube channel, our website, and wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you and have a great evening.